And thank you all of you for joining today. I am sitting here in a community garden of an elementary school right now, actually. And it has been fairly neglected. Let's see if I can give you a little bit. Just due to the school closure, a lot of the beds are still empty. Looks like there's some sort of carrot or celery plant over there. But I want to focus on all these other plants that we often consider weeds, which my hope and intention is that I can help invite you all to begin to look and perceive some of these plants differently rather than just seeing them as weeds, as pests, as plants that need to get pulled out of the ground. You may still want to pull them out of the ground, but more possibly to harvest them for the medicine or as a food even. Yeah, it is May 2nd. Yesterday was May Day. It's a really important time. It's the exact middle point between the equinox and the solstice. And so we are entering into this beautiful springtime. And I know we talked about this a little bit last time, but I really want to invite all of you to just begin to pay attention when you do get opportunities to go outside. And you don't necessarily need to go to, a special farm or a botanical garden or an arboretum to really begin to notice and see the different plants that are around you. And just taking maybe a little bit slower steps, slower breaths as you begin to notice some of those plants. There is this blue and white umbrella that I'm holding. It's been raining on and off here in Bellingham, so I will probably be maneuvering with this umbrella and the phone today. So I will try to keep the phone as still as possible to avoid any video vertigo. And we have, I believe, Robin monitoring the chat box. For all of those that are new to Zoom, there are some boxes on the bottom that give options for participation. There's the mute button, and there's also a chat box, and you can click whether the chat goes to everyone on the page or to a specific person in the group. So if there's any questions that come up, please type them in the chat box, and we will be monitoring those as well. So I want to get started with our first plant, and I would like to just get this video on it right now. Does anybody, there's a lot of plants in this field, but I'm curious if anybody knows which plant I am going to be talking about first. Back out a little bit. There's a few more. You've got some more mature ones that have gone to seed already, or going to seed. Here's a new one. Yes, I saw somebody say dandelions, and that is absolutely what we will be talking about. So, placing the umbrella down. First of all, let's just chat about the identification of dandelions. They all come out of the center. In botanical terms, it's often referred to as a rosette, where all the leaves and the stems originate from a local focal point here in the middle. And then we have the long stems, and if you break the stem, you can see that the middle is hollow. It goes all the way through. And a really unique characteristic to dandelions as well is that white milky material substance that's coming out of it. And that white milky material is also known as a latex, or biochemically known as an alkaloid. And if you taste it, which you can, it's quite bitter. I wouldn't recommend ingesting a lot of this, but it is a really effective bitter taste, which we will get into the medicine of bitters here shortly. One cool thing I really love about this latex, the substance, is that it can be really great at putting on a wart, a plantar wart topically. And you have to do it multiple times. But I have heard some success stories of folks utilizing this milky white substance from dandelion plants to help get rid of plantar warts. You just simply get enough of this and blot it over the wart itself, and then cover it up with a Band-Aid or a bandage of some sort, gauze, and just continue to do that for multiple days until you see the effects of the wart dying off and sloughing off from the skin tissue, leaving healthy skin tissue behind. It's pretty fun. There is, of course, the medicine of the wishes of dandelion, which is a fun, Leonidas and I, my son, who's going to be 2 this month, we were out in this field earlier this week and harvested a bunch of dandelions and made a dandelion crown that we all took turns wearing. It was very fun, very pollen filled. There's so much pollen all over my pants and our heads and eyelashes. It's a good thing that we didn't go into like complete reaction to the pollen. So here's a dandelion flower. It's from the aster family. The Latin name for dandelion is Taraxacum officinalis. And so some other identifying characteristics of the dandelion are all the compound leaf flowers on the dandelion flower, which is very characteristic to the aster plant family in general. And then the leaves here, let me get one to show you. So serrated edges, asymmetrical. They are fairly smooth. There's no hairs on them really. Not too waxy either. There is one plant that can look similar to the dandelions, and I will actually keep an eye out for it later on to just show you the difference between the two. But a big part of it is that those leaves tend to have what looks like almost like a texture of goosebumps on it and hairs, whereas the dandelion leaves are flat. They are edible. Often in stores like PCC and Whole Foods, and I'm sure at 21 Acres, it's not uncommon to find dandelion greens being sold in the produce section with other leafy greens. It's a really great offering of a nutrient-dense medicinal leafy green in the springtime, which is something I really wanted to focus on today, are some of the plant gifts for springtime that are popping up and showing up, especially following winter. You know, there's not a lot of, you know, winter's a time when all the plants, you know, kind of go to sleep and hibernate. And then all of a sudden in the springtime, you know, like the plants start resurging and blooming and budding. And there still isn't a lot of food that is producing and growing yet, but the majority of what is tend to be the leafy greens. You know, food cultivation, it's common to have like early spring greens like lettuces and different kinds of kales. Last time we talked about the nettle plant and how that is a great medical food, another nutrient dense leafy green. And dandelion greens, the leaves, are right there in that category. And as a matter of fact, the dandelion flowers can be a great medical food as well. I've seen a lot of different creative culinary inspirations on, I follow a lot of herbalists and wild crafters and foragers on Instagram, and I love seeing what they do with the plants. One idea that I have seen with the dandelion flowers is frying them up in a batter and making dandelion flower fritters. And then also just decoration and finishing dishes with all these beautiful, bright, sunshiny colors that we need as we come out of those winter months. There is something so magical actually when my son and I made the dandelion crown. I feel like there was definitely like a sunshiny energy to it. Whoever was wearing the crown, like it felt very special. So I've talked about a little bit about the leaves and the flowers, and essentially every part of the dandelion plant can be utilized for medicine and or food. So we have talked about the flower. Another great way to prepare the flower, aside from in culinary preparations, is a liquid infusion. I have historically done a dandelion infused wine, finding some sort of white wine that's not too sweet, more on the dry end, and infusing dandelion flowers in it that way. And it turns into a nice golden color. We talked about the white milky substance that comes from the stem. The leaves are great. Not only are they bitter, which I think this would be a good time to talk about bitterness. The root of the dandelion plant is also very bitter. And so that also is incorporated with this kind of medicine. So our tongue is mapped out with the different taste receptors, and they're not all intermingled all within the whole entirety of the tongue. So the receptors for more bitter tastes are actually on the back third of our tongue. And the back third of our tongue is innervated with this really important nerve called the vagus nerve. And so when I say innervated, all the sensations that are experienced on the tongue, the nerve that's responsible for receiving and transmitting these signals is the vagus nerve. And maybe some of you have heard of vagus nerve. It's commonly talked about in regards to the autonomic nervous system, more in particular to the parasympathetic nervous system. And that is the part of the nervous system that is responsible for rest and digest, and breed and feed is another way to explain it. It's the place when we're feeling calm. It's the state our nervous system needs to be in for appropriate digestion and absorption. It's the state our nervous system needs to be in order for healing to occur. The opposite state of the parasympathetic response is that sympathetic nervous system response, or fight or flight. And that is a state that gets initiated when we perceive a stressor of some sort, or a fear, or being startled, or sometimes even good stresses will get us into that sympathetic response of fight or flight. And our bodies oscillate between these two states pretty dynamically throughout the day. And they both are very important, and we need to honor that both of them serve us in certain ways. However, it is argued that especially the way that we live in our culture and the way that our nervous systems have been wired over time, or patterns that have stuck over time, that we often are spending more time in that sympathetic nervous system response, that fight or flight stress response, and not enough time recovering and the more yin state of that parasympathetic rest and digest and heal state. And again, going back to the vagus nerve is one of the primary nerves that is responsible for calming down and initiating that parasympathetic response. And that includes the bitter receptors back on our tongues. So back to that bitter taste. It's been established that when those bitter receptors are initiated, there's a cascade of effects that happen in our body. And it's, in a way, it's like jump-starting the parasympathetic response, especially in our digestive system. So one thing that happens with that bitter taste is that peristalsis begins. And peristalsis is this rhythmic, coordinated contraction and relaxation, and contraction and relaxation along our digestive tract. Feel the rain coming. Here comes the umbrella. So that happened, the peristalsis happens beginning in our stomach and all the way to our large colon, large intestines, and rectum. And that motion and movement helps to move our food throughout our digestive tract in a way that helps support the assimilation of the food, you know, getting out the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals that we need from our food, and the macronutrients like the carbohydrates and proteins and fats. Another thing that happens when those bitter receptors are initiated is that it helps release certain digestive enzymes and digestive juices that are needed to digest things like carbohydrates and proteins and fats in our meals. It also helps contract the gallbladder to release bile into our small intestines in order to also help with the digestion and breakdown of our food and our meals. So the bitter taste is really great. And a lot of traditional cuisines often begin a meal with things like salads or some sort of bitter aperitif, or maybe the meal ends with a bitter aperitif. But it's not uncommon in a lot of different ethnic cuisines to have some sort of bitter element to help support the digestion piece. And dandelion greens are a really great way to incorporate in that bitter component to a meal. I have also found that that bitter taste can help counter and distract from sugar cravings in practice with patients. I often will recommend a bitter tincture of some sort, and maybe it's even just dandelion root and dandelion leaf tincture. And whenever a sugar craving comes up, recommend just putting a few drops of that tincture on the back of the tongue, and maybe drinking some water, maybe taking a couple breaths, and then reevaluating if that craving is still there. If anything, it helps us, you know, begin to tune into our bodily sensations with that, and really notice, like, are we hungry right now, or is this more of a craving that's going on? That's not related to hunger, but related to something else. Another great aspect of the bitter taste, most things that are bitter tasting in nature are really good for the liver and gallbladder. And that's also, I believe, very correlated with that connection to the vagus nerve. The one contraindication that I would say in regards to dandelion root, dandelion greens, is that, again, going back to the bitter taste, one of the cascade effects of that bitter receptor being stimulated is the contraction of the gallbladder. So that's great, as long as the gallbladder is working well. But if you are suffering from gallbladder issues, or you know someone that is, that, like, whether it's gallstones or an actual inflammation of the gallbladder, I would really be conservative and take it easy with the bitter tasting things, including dandelion. Although arguably dandelion is probably one of the liver supportive herbs that is the most gentle on the liver and gallbladder. But those are two organs I have learned from experience, both personally and clinically, not to push. If you push the liver and gallbladder too much, there can be a cascade of different symptoms, and it kind of varies based on constitution, based on people's like personal like makeup and uniqueness to them. But things can be like headache, nausea, vomiting. Sometimes skin issues will pop up. Skin is very often connected and correlated to the health of the gut and the health of the digestive tract. Sometimes being prematurely full can be another symptom. Increase in body temperature, hot flashes is often related to liver function as well. And that includes hot flashes with menopause. I did see some questions popping up, so I want to pause here and make sure that those are getting answered. What do we have for questions right now?
Hi, Sarah Sue. I'll just talk about some of the questions in the chat. Okay. Kiana is asking, what's the best way to preserve and store dandelion greens?
Okay, let's start with that. Dandelion greens. So one way you can utilize them is just using them as like a fresh leafy green in a salad, similar to a lettuce. That's not preserving it. So let's talk about some of those. And let's talk a little bit more closely about what nutrients are actually found in the dandelion greens, because one of the ways that I really like preserving and processing the dandelion leaf greens is doing a vinegar infusion. And I love vinegar infusions. I typically use apple cider vinegar. And we talked about this in the last class. You are most certainly invited and open to use other different kinds of vinegars, especially if you really gravitate towards the taste of one, like a rice vinegar, or maybe it's more of a balsamic vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is just like a nice, good medium ground. It's got a little bit of the sweetness due to the apples. But vinegars are really great at extracting the minerals from plants, much more than a liquid extraction called an alcohol extraction, which is typically what a lot of tinctures are, is the alcohol medicinal extract of the plants. The nutrients that are found in dandelion leaf include, but are not excluded to, iron. And we talked about iron last time with the nettles too. This is another iron-rich leafy green. And really a lot of the edible leafy greens that are out right now have plant-based iron in them, which is pretty great. It has magnesium in it, vitamin C, potassium, which is a very important one to acknowledge for a moment. So one of the medicinal actions of the dandelion leaf is that it is a diuretic. I'm gonna get a better specimen here to show while I'm talking, while I try to hold a phone and an umbrella at the same time. May shower is here. Here's some nice ones. There we go, dandelion leaf. So a diuretic essentially just makes you pee more. Another couple of classic examples of diuretics are green and black teas and coffee. Those are both diuretics. So when you drink them, your kidneys end up excreting more fluid than if you didn't. Diuretics is a common term when used medically in regards to pharmaceutical blood pressure medications. There is a group of blood pressure medicines that basically the premise is like, if we reduce the volume of blood, the pressure will be less. And so there are diuretic pills that will allow one to excrete more liquids than they would otherwise. The thing with blood pressure diuretics is that when they increase the excretion and urination, extra urination of the urine, there are other things that come out in the urine then aside from just water. The kidneys filter the blood in general, and they filter out a lot of things from the blood, including metabolic toxins and breakdown products, toxins from the environment. The kidneys are a really important organ when it comes to organs of elimination and our body's natural ways that it eliminates toxins that we are exposed to in our environment, in our food, in our air, in our water, in the products we choose to buy and consume, like things like plastics. And that I always think about that, like any substance or material that repels water, or like Teflon, the inside of a microwave popcorn bag, all that stuff is just like loaded with environmental toxins that can just throw wrenches left and right in the health of our body and in our organ body systems. So our body's always working on detoxing. It's all the time. And the more that we're incorporating in plants, and you know, whether it's herbal medicine, medical foods that I'm introducing on these talks, or just our general plants from the produce aisle, we can really help support those detox pathways without having to like purchase any pills, any powders, do like any sort of particular cleanse. Really just incorporating plants in can be a really great way. And fiber and water and just regular exercise and movement. The liver and gallbladder are also very important organs of detox or elimination in our body. But back to the kidneys, what happens when people are taking blood pressure medicines that are diuretics? They are wasting away this very, very important mineral, potassium. And there's a term called potassium wasting. Wow, that was a tongue twister for me. And often it's important to supplement with potassium to make up for the loss of it. And potassium is very, very important electrolyte and mineral. Its use physiologically is very important when it comes to cardiac or heart muscle contractions and the function of the heart muscle itself. And the body requires a very small homeostasis of amounts and levels in the body. And when those drop below a certain amount, there can be risk of cardiovascular issues that can come up. So the very, I want to say cool thing, but I want to almost honor even more, like the design of the dandelion leaf plant is so brilliant because it not only helps as a diuretic to help clear out more liquid, and maybe it's just to help promote a little like further detox after a long winter of, you know, being caught up indoors and eating extra like processed foods because, you know, everything, the growing season's done. That's not as much of an issue these days with globalization and just all the food available year round. But there's large amounts of potassium in these dandelion leaves. And so it helps replete or return the potassium minerals to the body and still allow it to help filter and clear out our blood a bit more. So back to processing, I would recommend drying the leaves first, though you can do them fresh. There'll just be a little extra water in there, and then doing a vinegar infusion of that. And any sort of liquid infusion, I would recommend putting it in a jar, out of the sunlight, in a, you know, room temperature for at least 2 weeks. You can do longer, it's not going to hurt it. And then just go ahead and filter it out, and you can put it right back in the original vinegar container that you have and just use that herbal infused vinegar and your cooking and food preparation. Another way that it is often used is as a dried leaf tea. It's a really nice, lovely tea to add, whether solo by itself or in combination in herbal formulas like with other plants. I really, really enjoy harvesting these spring tonics, such as the dandelion leaves, the nettle leaves, the cleavers that we talked about last time, and making teas with those different ones. as well as plantain leaf, which is the other plant that I want to talk about today. And really just embracing the spring medicine and the spring tonics that Mother Nature is providing. The root is also used, and it kind of has it's a taproot shape, similar to what a carrot is. And the nature of that kind of shape of root makes it incredibly beneficial for the land that it grows in. Those sort of taproots that have a single root that is extending into the ground and into the soil help to aerate the soil and also prevent things like erosion and loss of cover. It's also returning a lot of nutrients to the soil. There's a lot of benefits of having dandelion present in any swath of land. And I really want to emphasize that, because for years, I grew up with the story that they were weeds and that they were pests and that they needed to get picked, they needed to get pulled. It wasn't uncommon to see my family or my neighbors, you know, turning to substances that these companies are making and trying to sell to essentially poison these plants. And that has detrimental effects on our soil levels, our, you know, the toxicity levels, our water systems, aquifers in the area. It's a big issue. It's turning into a much larger issue, when in all reality, dandelion medicine is something we all need for this day and age. I mean, we are a society that we're stuck in sympathetic dominance, that fight or flight response, and we're not getting that recovery. We're a population that has a lot of vitamin deficiencies, and these plants offer a lot of these essential nutrients and vitamins. Another, I mean, magnesium, which is also found in the dandelion leaf, is commonly found in a lot of these leafy greens, but is also, you know, I've heard and read in a lot of places that magnesium levels are just not what they used to be in the soil. And that is a very important mineral. It's a cofactor for many different biochemical pathways in our body, well over 200. A very important nutrient to have. And again, going back to organs of elimination, these dandelion plants, they're supporting not only the kidneys, but the liver and the gallbladder. The liver does so much detox in the body. It breaks down not only the outside toxins that we're exposed to, but it helps with maintaining healthy levels of substances in our body. And that includes cholesterol levels. That's total cholesterol, LDL, HDL cholesterol, VLDL, all those names that you see on a lipid panel. Woo, we are getting some wind here. And it also helps liver health and the liver's ability to function and not be overwhelmed or overburdened by too many toxins and too many things demanding its attention. Balancing of sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And it helps not only with production, but the recycling and breakdown of these hormones. And so liver health is often a body system that I want to support and address if there's any sort of sex hormone issues. And the dandelion root is another great medicine for that. I think of specifically liver and gallbladder when it comes to dandelion root. And again, you can make a tea with it, whether dried or fresh. You can roast dandelion root lightly in the oven. Doing the roasted dandelion really changes the flavor of it. Roasted dandelion roots often found in herbal caffeine-free coffee substitutes that I've seen available. It's also a great one that can be tinctured. Alcohol tincture extracts a lot of those medicinal constituents. And there's also a lot of products that are encapsulated. So the herbs that are just ground down into a fine powder and then encapsulated as a way for people to take them. And that's important to consider, is like, if I want to start taking one of these plants regularly, like what is going to be the most realistic way to do it? How am I going to be the most compliant with getting this medicine in me regularly? And it's just all about personal preference. And it's great that we have all these options of these different ways and methods to get our medicines into us. I've also incorporated dandelion leaves into pestos. I don't use a lot because that bitter taste will come through, but I will use a little bit just to infuse it with the dandelion medicine. Okay, I think I covered the main points that I wanted to highlight about dandelion. What other questions are there?
I'll go ahead and read some of the questions from the chat. I see a few questions in here. One is it safe to just go outside and pick the dandelions behind my house? And I have another question here. Does it have any interactions with allopathic medication and other herbs? And can you touch on the uses of dandelion flowers?
Okay, so when it comes to harvesting, it's important to consider, has that area been exposed to surface runoff from roads? If it's too close to a road, I would hesitate on harvesting it. It's a good thing they're there because they are definitely protecting and replenishing the soil, but not necessarily great to be harvesting and picking. If you know the history of your land, if it, you know, as far as what's been sprayed or what hasn't, like what chemicals or fertilizers or pesticides have been used, that's an important thing to take into consideration. If you're harvesting plants alongside a trail, we talked about this a little bit last time, you want to consider that there's like animals, primarily dogs, along the trail that might have peed or had a bowel movement near that area. You want to stay away from those ones. But also just like the intrinsic value of these plants along a trailside or along a roadside. You know, a little bit about like the respectful harvesting. You don't want to take the first plant you find, especially if it's located in a place where many people could enjoy it. But you also don't want to stress a population. Dandelions, we probably don't have to worry about that too much. It's just more of like, what has been the history of this area, and do I feel comfortable harvesting it? In regards to contraindications, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but that does not mean that there could potentially be some. But Dandelion Taraxacum officinalis in general, whether it's leaf, root, or flower, is not really one that is discussed as a precautionary plant. You know, one thing I say, I try to bring attention to with my patients that are on medications, and as they start actually doing some healing and changing diet and lifestyle and bringing in these like therapeutic foods and medicines, is that, yeah, your body might start to heal and the amount of medicine that you need may go down. And so it's important to monitor for symptoms of what overdose might look like with whatever medication you're taking. Learn and get educated on those symptoms and continue to have a conversation with your prescriber about that, to check in, and or maybe you get your levels retested for whatever the reason you're taking the medication, whether it's blood pressure, and that can easily be done just getting an at-home blood pressure cuff to measure those levels, or getting retested for thyroid or the lipid medicines. So that I think it's important to just be proactive with that and get educated. And if you don't know, ask someone who does. Set up a visit with someone like me who's a naturopathic doctor and has the herbal medicine education, or a local naturopath or herbalist. And it's nice to talk to someone and get their perspective rather than just trying to read it on the internet. I think that it's important that we can get educated that way, but it's nice to have an objective perspective because we can't always see what's stuck in our subjective reality. There was one more question there that I can't recall. Can you repeat that, Rebecca?
Yes, question about the uses of the flowers of the dandelion.
Yeah, they're going to contain and hold similar medicines as the leaves and root. They aren't emphasized as much when it comes to the herbal medicine materia medica, but you could just think of it as like the light part of the medicine. And I'm sure, I mean, that yellow coloration of those flowers to me indicates that there's a lot of flavonoids, which are great plant compounds that are anti-inflammatory and very good for our overall health. And if there's any other questions, go ahead and type them in. I will get to them. And I want to get to our other plant that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to do a screen swap here. So the one that I want to talk about next is called Plantain Leaf. And here are some samples of it down here. This is a really nice one, actually. Let's get this one. Thank you, Plantain. So here we go. As you can see, primarily smooth edges. I do notice that there's a little bit of, not texture, what's the word? They aren't completely smooth and perfect edges. And I think it's just the variability of the plantain, but they're not serrated by any means. And then you notice that the most prominent veins of the leaf stem from the bottom where they are congregated. Let's see here. Getting rain on my phone. And then they go up in a straight line. And I want to show you guys something cool here. When you break the plantain, that one doesn't show it as much. I don't know if you can see that, but there is a little fibrous string within each of these veins here. And I'm sorry, I gotta cover myself back up because it's still raining. Do any of you guys recognize that? Have you seen that in your own yard, in your own garden, on your own walks? There's a couple different kinds. There's actually a lot of different plantain leaf plants available. This is one of the more common ones. It's more oval shaped, but there's another one that is really prominent in the Pacific Northwest that is more of a lancet shape or more of a sword type shape. So much longer and elongated and thin. And again, it grows in a rosette formation with the plant, as you can see here. It's all coming from the base and coming out of the middle, the epicenter of the plant. And some of them can be smooth, but it's not uncommon to find like smooth, velvety hairs on the plantain leaf as well. And this plant is found throughout the United States. There's folk stories of how when the white European folks were beginning to settle in the different parts of North America, that wherever they came, plantain followed in their footsteps. It showed up and popped up as this new exotic species. And the Native Americans started noticing that. And it got a nickname called white man's footprint as a result of it. But what the Native Americans found was that this wasn't just a noxious weed that just popped up that was invasive. They learned and appreciated the medicinal qualities of this plant and began to utilize it and learn more about it. Some of the medicinal qualities of plantain, it's anti-inflammatory, so it helps reduce inflammation, free radicals that are floating around in our bloodstream. Plantain is one of my favorite outdoor first aid herbs. For skin wounds, for bug bites, for nettle stings. This is another great one that can help counter a nettle sting. It has very drawing properties. And when I say that, it'll help draw out any sort of microbes. It's antimicrobial as well. there's been research that it's also specific antibacterial against staph bacteria, staphylococcus. So it'll help pull out different microbes. It'll pull out different foreign objects like splinters or stingers from bees, as well as any sort of debris that comes with tissue damage. So like that white oozy substance that our bodies can make when there's an infection. Interestingly enough, I ended up getting a pretty bad cut on my finger last week that was starting to get pretty infected. Like the tissue healed over the area, and it hadn't been appropriately cleaned because we were really busy doing some moving. And yeah, it started to get really infected. And so I actually came out to this field and found some plantain and ended up doing a couple spit poultices with it 2 or 3 days in a row. And by that, I just took a bite and broke up the cell walls and in my mouth by chewing it. That helps release the medicine. And then I put that on my wound and covered up with a Band-Aid, primarily just to keep that plant next to the wound. And within a few days, it cleared up. I didn't have to touch antimicrobial ointment at all, luckily. And plantain is definitely not as bitter as dandelion leaves, but it does have a slightly bitter taste. It just kind of has that like leafy green sort of taste, maybe like an undertone of cucumber or watermelon. So here's the example of the spit poultice, and then you can just put it on wherever the wound is, the sting, the bite, the irritation. And not only is it antimicrobial and helps draw things out, it can help with the pain, which is something I noticed firsthand last week too, because that infection underneath my fingernail bed was exquisitely painful. And I found that within a couple minutes of that plantain poultice on the wound, that pain significantly reduced. And really the only risks of that is that it may dye your skin or your fingernail a brown color due to the pigment of the plant itself. Another really great action of plantain leaf is that it's antiviral as well. A great way to take it in is just doing a simple plantain leaf tea herbal infusion. Whether you can use fresh plantain, which I've heard a lot of, not a lot, but I've heard a handful of case studies where fresh plantain leaf was used rather than the dried. But you can also use dried. It's a great herb to incorporate into an herbal formula for wound healing in general. There are other plants that you can incorporate in, and there's this like really cool concept of like the synergy of plants. Like when you're going for some sort of like healing action, formulating with a couple herbs can be really helpful because you get the whole profile of all the plants doing the actions that are intended. I saw that there were a couple questions that popped up.
It's Becca again. I'm going to read some of these questions and just encourage people as well. If you're ready to enter a Q&A portion, Sarah Sue, folks could ask that question themselves as well if they want to. So some of the questions are, how do you wash your plants before use? And then it looks like Ariel was going to try plantain leaf tea tonight. Was asking if it's true that plantain leaf tea will help with sinus drainage. And then another question about if it will help with cystic acne.
Okay. So as far as cleaning, when I'm out in the field, like doing the poultice thing, I'm usually just wiping the leaf off of like any sort of like cobwebs, or if there's like whatever like sort of debris gets on plants just by the nature. Pollen was really thick on the nettle leaves, I noticed. when we did the walk last month. But if you are to do a big harvest, I would recommend just rinsing it off in water in like a colander so that it can drain off, and then placing the wet leaves on a towel to let them air dry that way. With the roots, getting them wet, scrubbing them off, because you're going to have to make sure to get all that dirt off. That's going to be pretty tough on the teeth if that's whatever dirt like remains on there is risk of, you know, tooth injury in the future. As far as sinus drainage, this is a complex one because, you know, when I think about these conditions, I'm thinking about like, well, what is the cause and what organs need to be addressed in order to address the chief complaint of the person. And so my question is like, well, why are the sinuses plugged in the first place? Why are they draining? Is it environmental allergies? Is it a food allergy? Is it mold exposure? I think that incorporating plants in like plantain can certainly help lower overall load of inflammation and you know, assist with some antimicrobial properties. Maybe it's a viral infection in the sinuses. It just depends on the cause, and if that cause is unknown, I would say that plantain is not going to hurt you. It's only going to benefit you, but it may not have the therapeutic effect that you are desiring if the obstacle is not removed or addressed or identified. The other question was another condition, right, Rebecca? I'm trying to recall that third one.
The other question was about cystic acne as well.
Oh, cystic acne, yes. Again, I think I go back to like what, you know, like what is the underlying cause and what are the conditions that have been created that allows the cystic acne to be forming. And again, like I mentioned before, skin health, I often identify that as deeply connected to gut health and addressing gut health, and liver as well, because often, especially if it's more of a cyclical nature related to having a uterus and menstruating, if the acne is getting worse prior to menstruation or right at the beginning of menstruation, to me, there could be a hormone component. But sometimes it's more just related to underlying inflammation of the digestive tract and allergies, or just overall burden of toxins in the body, and the liver is not able to keep up with the detoxification pathways that it is designed to do, and the hormone recycling and production that is designed to do. And so incorporating in more liver supportive herbs like the dandelion root, but also liver supportive foods like leafy greens, like the kales and the collards and the chards, all of the foods from the brassica family, the broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, turnips, radishes, beets are also very liver supportive. Berries are great liver supportive foods as well, and just high fiber diet in general with adequate hydration to counter that is what I would say in regards to the cystic acne. It can be palliative. I think if you were to make something like an infusion with the plantain, it could help alleviate symptoms. But there's got to be probably some deeper addressing of the gut before, you know, to actually do some therapeutic healing with that. Let's open it up to some more questions. I'm happy to talk more about plantain, but I'm happy to also await some specific questions from you guys, and you are welcome to ask them. Unmute your button and go ahead and ask away. Anybody?
While we're waiting for folks to think of a question, one more question came up in the chat about best general reference book or herbal medicine harvesting book that you could recommend.
Yes, I love that question. So I actually have, oh, I didn't bring it. I will give you the names of some herbalists that have written books that are some of my favorites that are still references for me, just as reviews and reminders. One book that I really love is by Dr. Deborah Francis. She's a naturopathic doctor as well as a registered nurse. And she wrote a book that's, the title's something like A Practical Guide for Everyday Healing or Modern Medicine. It's the only book she wrote. So if you just look up herbal book from Dr. Deborah Francis, you can find that. Another great one is by Matthew Wood. He is a really great herbalist that has, I've learned a lot from him just through his literature. And I would say hands down one of my favorite go-to books is by Sharon Tilgner, and that's Tilgner. And she is an herbalist as well as the owner of this very large organic farm in Oregon. It's yellow. I can't remember the name of it and I look at it all the time. It's funny, I almost brought those books with me today, and I didn't because it was raining. But if you just look up Sharon Tilgner, that it's a materia medica, which essentially means that there's a list of each herb and its herbal action, contraindications. She does a great job of also just giving like sort of like an energetic picture to a lot of the plants, and then she has the she divides it up by body systems and talks about different conditions within the body system, and she even has a little bit of medicine making instructions in there. There we go. Thank you. Herbal medicine from the heart of the earth. Rosemary Gladstar also has some pretty great herbal medicine, especially everyday herbal medicine making books out there. There's a handful of those ones as well, and those are really great ones to begin with for budding herbalists that are just starting to learn and get introduced to some of these. I actually did end up grabbing one book that I haven't looked at it as much as I would like, and I was reminded we had it when we moved last week. It's called Northwest Foraging, and is by Doug Benoliel, Benoliel. And this one's more about foraging of food. It's not, he doesn't talk so much about the herbal medicine of it. And he does mention dandelions and the plantain. Another one that's out a lot that I wanted to talk about today, but it's just not as fun in person because the taste is so unique, and I really love to introduce this herb and give people opportunity to taste it. But like the different kind of sorrels, sheep sorrel, lemon sorrel, all the different kind of wild foraging foods that are found in this region. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we only got to 2 herbs today, but these are 2 very important herbs, and herbs that I really am growing to love and respect the more and more that I learn about them and work with them and use them and become an advocate for them, really, especially the dandelions. You know, I talked about this a little bit in the last class, but I do think it's important to notice and recognize what plants show up in many different parts of the land, whether it's the country, the North America, or maybe it's just in this area. Plants that are identified as noxious weeds or invasive species that people have historically like sought out to destroy and get rid of are often plants that contain medicines and nutrients and minerals that our bodies could really benefit from and arguably really desperately need, at least some of them. Another classic example of that is St. John's wort. It's a great medicine for many different things, including helping with, you know, symptoms of depression. And that plant is considered an incredibly invasive species, and people are not allowed to cultivate it as a result of it. Yet here it is as a medicine that is arguably pretty beneficial for a lot of us folks in today's society and culture. And you know, going back to the dandelions, like they are, you know, they're incredibly important. And I think it's just about reframing how we see and perceive these plants. You know, it's just like getting to know a person. Like you have a bad first impression of them, or like you guys had a bad interaction. But does that mean that it's fair to write them off? Or like, what if you give them a second chance? And what if you were able to put yourself out there to get another experience and opportunity with them, to stay open, to stay curious about it? I find that historically, like people that I initially had maybe a bad first impression of end up being some of my favorite people in the long run. And I always have to reassure myself when that happens over and over again. It's like, you're gonna really like this person then, because you don't right now because you just met them. And I think about that with plants too. Like, you know, at first glance, we can see them in a certain light, a certain story that we tell ourselves about the plants. But when we just continue to stay curious and pay attention, we're not only allowing ourselves another opportunity to have a different experience, but we're giving the plants another chance too. And I invite you to keep your eyes out for the plantain, and notice where it comes up. It's found in a lot of disturbed areas, in a lot of yards, alongside roadsides, mixed in with other different kinds of, quote, weeds. And again, that can be just like such a great first aid kit one to have, and just to even sometimes take note of and pay attention wherever you find yourself hiking or camping. Note where the plantain is, because that might be that might be required as your first aid kit. It's nice to know what you have supply wise, where you decide to inhabit and share the space in Mother Nature. Thank you all for joining today. We will be doing this again in a couple weeks, and I want to continue just celebrating the theme of spring and some of these spring plants that are popping up. And as the season continues, we will get more into maybe some of the more cultivated herbal medicines, and hopefully we will be able to do this in person, though I do think that this has been a really great opportunity in making this more accessible for folks who can't always get to the farm in Woodinville. But yes, thank you for today. If you have any other questions, whether in regards to what we talked about today or anything else further, you can get in touch with me a couple different ways. There is my website, journeyhomehealing.com, and you can just go to the contact me page. My email address that you can get in touch with me is going to be journeyhomehealing@gmail.com. And my phone number is 206-607-8555. And happy May Day.
Thank you, Sarah Sue. That was wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
All right. Well, I am going to sign off here. Stop this recording. There we go.